The floor is all yours, sir. Please go ahead.
Ji. So thank you for inviting me. Namaste to all the students and good afternoon. I think good evening. So very interesting topic today. What ought, I'm emphasizing the term ought to be the central questions of philosophy, right? This is our question. So yesterday is somehow I took more time. I thought we should have had some more dialogue. So today we will try that. I will try to introduce the topic to you from the perspective that I think is important at this point. Then I told Rahul also to inform the participants to come prepared with their understanding of philosophy. Because, see, this is a loaded question. What ought implies many things. Ought implies obligation. When you say that you ought to take care of your parents, right? It's a kind of duty and responsibility. Then ought can also imply advisability. One ought to take care of oneself, right? This is also the meaning of ought. Then ought also implies some kind of natural expectation, right? That you ought to have gone and met him. You ought to have responded to that person. You ought to respond to my messages. You ought to listen to me, etc. These are natural expectations. So this also is part of ought. Then ought, finally, the more important meaning is ought implies logical consequences as well, right? That this ought to happen. If I take care of my health, I ought to become healthy. Logical consequences. It could be a natural consequence also, as we said. It could be an advisability also, and ought could be an obligation as well, a moral obligation. Moral obligation meaning morality is a heavily loaded term and a confused term. Philosophers world over are trying to define what is morality, and we have not still reached a scientific answer, a hard scientific answer to what is morality, what is ethics. So that keep that in mind always, that morality we don't know clearly. Everyone has their own morality. It could be a cultural morality, it could be a social morality, it could be religious morality or heritage morality, whatever that be. Anything could become moral. One community may think certain act is moral and other community may think exactly opposite. We have examples like that in our country also. The two things can mean totally opposite things in the name of morality. So moral obligation also is part of ought. When we say you should not harm others, you ought to not harm others, right? You must take care of yourself. You must take care of the nature around you, the environment. So all these are also, ought is a very serious term, and if you are interested, just for your information, you should check John Locke. He talked about ought problems, that what kind of, how in nature we don't find any ought, we only find is. There is rain, not that there ought to be rain. So these are very serious problems. You should search is an ought problem. So that being the second term, what, we know what is what, right? It's a question. We are starting a question. What we are trying to do, what I am trying to convey to you is that we should understand the question first. Like I said, like I told you yesterday, if we talk about dogs, we should know which dog we are referring to. Otherwise, we just we are both all of us are traveling in different paths. If our terminologies, questions are not on, we are not standing on the same grounds. So first we have to come on the same grounds. From there we can move forward together. If we are not in the same ground, who is going where, we don't know. So understanding the question and whether the question is a right question may be right or wrong, that depends on how you understand the question. This is also philosophy, by the way, what I'm doing right now. This is not separate from philosophy. It's an analysis, logical, philosophical analysis, a linguistic analysis as well. Because philosophers world over are still trying to define what is philosophy itself. That maybe some may think this is a weakness, but I think this is a great strength of philosophy. so that we can still realize that there are certain sections that we may not be aware of, our attention may not be there, and because we are open to questioning the subject itself. Physics doesn't question really what is its subject unless there is a basic change in the theoretical structure. But philosophy has no such structures, right? We even study metaphysics in philosophy, physics beyond the physical, meta to physics. So questions of God come, questions of numbers of reality come in such cases. So that's why philosophy is a somewhat a very different kind of area of study. So in keeping that in mind, I thought we should understand the question what we are asking here and what are its implications. Then we can try to answer it together, right? So what ought? Now I told you what does ought mean. So we are saying what are the obligations of philosophy. If we are saying central questions, what natural logical consequence of studying philosophy, or what are natural expectation, or what is advisable, right? These 5 6 meanings, Merriam-Webster dictionary, if you check, you will find all these meanings for ought. So what ought to be the central questions of philosophy? So philosophy itself is a kind of questioning. Most of our subjects are a kind of questioning. So central questions of philosophy. Now, philosophy is another term. That's why I asked all of you, requested all of you that come prepared with your answers, because I may give you certain views and I have 10 different definitions of philosophy with me, but I should also know that where you guys stand, because in general life, if somebody is giving us very high fundas, we say, keep this philosophy aside and let us talk practical stuff, right? So we think that the general worldview of the person is philosophy, falsafa, as we say in Urdu, I suppose. And uh, tattva jnana is another word that we use in Indian tradition, very importantly. Tattva jnana. In Maharashtra, we may pronounce it differently. Jnana, we say there in central India, upper central India, and Maharashtra, we say Jnana, Tattva Jnana. This is what the department is called in Pune University, Tattva Jnana Vibhag. Another term for Indian philosophy is Bharatiya Darshan. So, Darshan implies a kind of a vision, not the philosophy of this English terminology. I will tell you the meaning of that word also. But Bharatiya Darshan, the vision of the Indians. Darshan is vision. And also it means the instrument of vision. Our literature, the Shastras that we get in Hindu philosophy, the books that we have in Buddhist philosophy, Charvak philosophy, we have basically 2 sections in Indian philosophy, Astika Darshana and Nastika Darshana. Loosely, if I translate, theistic philosophy and atheistic philosophy. There's a different meaning in Indian context. Nastika does not mean atheist. Nastika means who does not accept the authority of the Vedas, because Vedas are our oldest central books, which contain purely philosophical literature also as part of it. Heavy duty philosophical literature, very complicated, very subtle, from logic to ontology to ethics to epistemology, everything you can find there. And I personally not found anything in Western philosophy which I have not seen in Indian philosophy much developed. So earlier, what used to happen 40 50 years ago, whenever Western authors wrote an introduction to philosophy, they gave a title like that, basics of philosophy, introduction to philosophy, and they skipped the Indian philosophy totally from that. They never considered Indian philosophy as part of philosophy, Indian darshanas as part of philosophy, because Western tradition is dry, only intellectual. They seek knowledge, they seek understanding. But in Indian context, when we talk about darshana and tattva jnana, we don't remove spirituality, we don't diverge from religion also, we don't diverge from culture also. If you see, we don't have a term for religion in Sanskrit, right? So it's such that the whole system is holistic. So just to give you an understanding of the terminology, so now that you are attending lectures on philosophy, you should also be able to talk about philosophy to people, your friends, etc. So where I usually begin talking about this topic is the definition of the English term philosophy. The definition of the Sandhi Vichhed, if we do in Sanskrit, as we say, or if we break the term, it comprises of two terms called philo and sophia. Philo, Sophia. Sophia, I suppose, I'm not sure, you should check on this. I think she was the goddess of wisdom in Greek. These are Greek terms. Philosophia, and philo is love. So love of wisdom, right? This is the basic starting point. All students of philosophy just by heart this. So anyone asks you what is philosophy, begin there. Then you can connect all threads later. So love of wisdom, because the terminology is English. Now, very gray explanation. What is wisdom then? Some say it is love of knowledge. Some say it is love of truth. Some say it is love of learning. And the etymologically root meaning is love of wisdom. Now, wisdom could be anything, about anything. Now, you are wise in economics. I may be wise in philosophy. Somebody else may be wise in some other subject. So wisdom can mean many things. So this goes along with what we were trying to do yesterday, that philosophy studies all disciplines. So that is fine. Now, what does wisdom mean? That's why we have to define also what is being wise. So as I told you yesterday, and that's why that topic was taken first before coming here, because there is no other way for us to communicate other than being rational. If we are not logical, can we communicate? Not possible. If you don't know the logic of the language I talk, we are gone. So information, data, perceptions, experiences, experiment, what have you, any subject you take, it has to be rationally organized, arranged. That's the way to make it more productive and conducive for our consumption. If it's not logical, rationally organized, properly understood, even research and specialization also is a kind of arrangement. You see, there may be many of us who have information worth of a PhD thesis already, but if you don't present it in an organized manner to the university, you won't get a PhD. You understand? So anything you write in your answer papers also, anything you write in your exams also, it has to be logical. The more it makes sense to the faculty, that's why you also have to understand what the faculty is saying. So that you can answer to the faculty clearly. Understand the question first. Many students write answers which actually are not answering the question. So that is another problem which is there if you don't understand the question. So you and me, may go to Europe. Let's say we may go to Denmark, all of us, and we may start looking for Kashi Vishwanath temple. So the question itself is wrong. If we go to Denmark and ask people, where is Kashi Vishwanath? It's not there. People, if they don't know about Kashi Vishwanath, they'll say, ask somebody else. In India, we see many people who don't know the address. They say, okay, go straight. So somebody in Denmark will tell you, go straight across the street. It's there. So you keep searching for an answer. You keep searching for a result, but the question itself is wrong. So that's why understanding the question is important. So that's why we are focusing first. I'm focusing here before coming to all of you to get your views on what is philosophy. Because philosophy, also philosophers in 20th century and 21st century have defined philosophy as an activity. Philosophy in basic, now I'm summarizing what I said in last 5-10 minutes, that philosophy in a way studies the structures of our experiences, our theory, our worldview about life, how we look at things. Here no particular subject is coming. That's why philosophy also studies sciences. If you study history, itihas, then history your focus is on identifying, finding out chronological, historical evidences. But you never question the subject itself. History will never question the subject, that whether this way of studying history has what kind of implications and consequences it has. Only philosophy and logic can do that question the subject itself. So similarly, science will never question itself because it begins from empirical reality. It presumes the reality of the world in Indian tradition, we have a theory which says world is mithya, maya, not illusion. It's mithya. What appears, it may not be that. So that kind of approach can be taken when you question the subject itself. So philosophy is always, trying to update itself. That's why it's continuing. And in earlier times, in Greek times, and even in Indian tradition, this we are talking about the beginning of philosophy in Greek history is around 600, 700 BCE, before Common Era. And here in India also, Vedas, they say it could be from now on, it could be 3000, 4000, even some say 6000 BCE. So it is this old. So that time, when there were no organized fixed structures of study, philosophers were studying astronomy, philosophers were studying medicine, philosophers were studying geometry. Plato, Aristotle, they had universities, the first models of universities in the West. Lyceum and all, if you check, they started a university. Everything was studied there, mathematics. Even now, many mathematicians who go very deep, even Einstein, we know that he had philosophical differences with other scientists. Once something comes up in mathematical calculation, one fact is discovered, how to interpret it is a different matter. It's a philosophical matter, because experimentally we have no basis how to interpret it. That there is energy everywhere. Matter is not there. It's like moving molecules, moving structure. What do you make of that? So you have to have a philosophical basis for that. So that's why we are discussing this question. So love of wisdom, as I said, and in Indian tradition, I said it is a kind of a darshan, it is a vision, or tattva jnana. The knowledge in the sense I explained yesterday, the difference between knowledge and information. Knowledge of the most basic, the tattva. What is that forms it? What is it that forms knowledge? So if we understand that structure, not the knowledge itself, the basics of knowledge also, all these descriptions will lead us to different branches of philosophy. If you are getting what I'm saying, what the points that I'm expressing, all these will tell you, from this tree itself will branch different branches of philosophy, which is metaphysics and ontology. One of your topic is their epistemology and ontology of economics. So ontology is the study of being. In philosophy, we study how is the reality, is the beingness of the world, the existence that we are, that also has to be studied. What is the meaning of that? Are we different? My existence and other person's existence are different or the same? In Indian context, we call it satta mimasa. Mimasa means a kind of interpretation and analysis of anything. And satta, as we know, is the truth, the existence, being. And in Western context, we call it metaphysics. Physics is the physical, and metaphysics, because being is not physical, right? Being, how can we understand it? There's so much literature on being. We know all that, we are, that are and is that we use in our language, that we all are. This is a natural statement, you won't even question. But if this are was not there, is and are, is implies that existence. So that is very important. That is where everything begins, really. See, if is not there, we are not here, then nothing will be here. Yeah. So being and nothingness, these are two topics in metaphysics. To be and to be not. These two questions are very important questions. The whole life can flow from this, right? Even death, there's one philosopher, sorry to be so, discussing some macabre topics, but death is a very important topic. Because if we didn't die, what will be the meaning of life? Because you don't need to eat if you are not dying. You don't need to work. You don't need to prove yourself. You don't need to do something. You can just be and just be. Doesn't matter. You will be always, immortality. Like how God is defined in our traditions. He or she is always, eternally, every time, before beginning of time and after. So God does not necessarily have to do anything, but we have to do, because we have a limited time. So death, being and non-being, existence and non-existence, life and death, these two are a frame of references which we cannot move away from. Though we may want to avoid talking about death, we may think it's a very, yesterday also actually one example came about death. So we may, however, we may want to avoid this topic. It is true. That is the point. It is a fact of life, a very hard fact, very bitter fact also, if you are, if you are too much in love with life, probably. So metaphysics, Satta Mimasa. How is Satta? Analyze that. That is the one of the first branches of philosophy. Very important. Second is called epistemology. Epistemology, in again in Greek, episteme means knowledge, and ology is study of that particular subject, theory of knowledge, or science of knowledge also we can say. Science, when I talk now, don't get confused with natural sciences. Natural science definitions are very different. We usually get confused when we try to prove religion as scientific, whatever we say as scientific. Science is not that. We can say we are using logic or tarka, not science. Science, of course, uses rationality and logic, which we talked about yesterday, but their way of functioning about empirical reality is totally different. Not like us. We are not dealing with these kinds of realities. We are dealing with human beings. You guys are dealing with human beings because you are social scientists. Definition is very different. Don't try to prove yourself like the way scientists do. They are doing a different activity. Their questions are different than you. So epistemology, theory of knowledge, this is the standard definition. Theory of knowledge. How do we get knowledge? You know something, but how do you know something? That is also a question, no? You may have a yellow glasses on your eyes. You are wearing a yellow spectacle and you see through that spectacle and you say, yeah, things are yellow. Why should I accept that? You are wearing a spectacle. You are getting your knowledge based on your eyes. If you have a faulty vision also, people see many things, people hallucinate also, right? Hallucination is a known phenomenon. So they may say they see something in the night, they see something in the dream. That is their way of knowing, episteme. They are getting knowledge from that. But it does not mean that that knowledge is true. So similarly, one of my professors, she did this when they teach kids about questioning. They don't teach children philosophy. They try to help them start questioning things. So they show them a bent stick. We all have seen this bent stick experiment, that why stick seems bent. So kids don't understand. When they see, they get very surprised that why it was a straight stick. Then they wonder that what I see also cannot be necessarily true because of refraction, right? So sun's position that we see, sun is never in the position that we see in the sky. The rays, when they travel into our atmosphere, they get bent and it creates a different kind of angle, and sun actually has set already before we see it setting, right? This is a fact. So things are not the way you see them, you know them. So you have to be careful about conclusions that you make based on the information and knowledge, even knowledge that you have. Somebody can give you false knowledge, create a logical structure and give you, like we see fake news, fake information, right? How data can be manipulated. I think Ashish sir's one post I was seeing in which how data science, they were trying to say, what is this really data science? How you can change it the way you want. So these are all, episteme. You have a knowledge and how to use that, you have to be careful about it. So epistemology, another very important subject. In Indian tradition, we have this 4 or 5 means through which we get knowledge. One is pratyaksha praman. Pratyaksha is perception. Pramana is what gives you knowledge. Pramana is something which is authentic, which you can trust. So I see the glass, I see the screen. This is knowledge. I can confirm it directly. So many people, if we hear their social media, for example, it's virtual reality, right? See, there is a different kind of metaphysics, virtual reality. But that is now become more real. Our ID cards are more real than you. You may say, go and say, I am XYZ, but they will say, no, show ID card. So are you more real or the ID card more real? That's another question. Similarly, our social media accounts are like that. We think that that is the reality, how we appear there. So now that's why there is a philosophy of identity there. Now this is latest which is going on, that how these identity are created, authenticity and identity. In authentic life, what you are, and in identity, how you create your identity online. Brands create an identity. They may not necessarily be that, but just if you create that impression, people will take it to be real. That is the point here. So knowledge, how reality you perceive and how you get the knowledge of that reality is also important. So pratyaksha praman. Pratyaksha includes our senses basically, seeing, touching, tasting, smelling, and what is that? Seeing, touching, tasting, smelling, and there's a fifth one, hearing, right? Five senses, right? These, when we hear, we know there is a truth to this. Once I've seen it, now I've seen it with a yellow spectacle or green spectacle or red spectacle. That is for me to understand, or I can find that out. So that implies further study in that topic. Now third is first is pratyaksha, second is word. These books that you read, all the literatures in economics, that is all words given by somebody. So that is also authority in a way, that gives you knowledge. So you have to find out which are the best authors, why they are considered best, how much work they've done, whether they have been caught in some controversies or whether they have plagiarized somewhere, etc., etc. Depending on that, you can decide how authentic this knowledge is. Similarly, online, we have to now separate this milk from water and understand what is true, good knowledge, information, authentic, which is pramana. I can accept it on word. So in our tradition, Indian tradition, our books are the pramanas. For Hindu philosophy, Vedas are pramana. For Buddhist philosophy, Buddha's words are pramana. For Jain philosophy, their guru's words are pramana, etc. So these two, and third is called anumana. Anumana is inference, logic, rationality, what we talked about yesterday. That you know certain information, and from that information you derive other information which are either inbuilt in it or which you can generalize for everything. Deduction and induction, these are two parts. The technical part, not something complicated, but in deduction, as we say, it's like a khas specific conclusion when we reach through certain data. That's called deduction. And when we generalize based on certain information, that all human beings I've met can talk, therefore every human being can talk. This is an induction. This can never be 100%. This is also a problem in science. You can never reach a conclusion which is 100% true other than in mathematics. But mathematics is a linguistic structure, normative structure that we've created. But mathematics is not reality. In reality, we can never know that all human beings can talk. If one is found, then the whole premise is gone. Whole conclusion is gone. These three are main. There are many different ways to get pramanas also. Experiential, mystics can talk about something else. Upamana, comparison is there, etc., etc. These three are main: pratyaksha, anumana, and shabda praman. All our academic activity is a kind of shabda praman. We are reading books and books and books and writing researches, writing on books and books and creating more words. These are words for the future generation. So this is for the second branch of philosophy, epistemology. Again, very important. Third is ethics. So ethics, this odd question that you have added, I should know that who added this odd question also, so there will be some more clarity. That how can we decide this odd? Where is that obligation? How will we understand, considering what we spoke now about the branches and the meaning of the term philosophy, differences in Indian and the Western context? Now everybody is accepting that Indian philosophy also is philosophy, because religion was and spirituality was included in Indian tradition. The Westerners initially ignored all the Eastern traditions. They ignored Taoism from China, Buddhism, Zen Buddhism. Zen literature, if you see their logic, there is a school in Hindu philosophy called Nyaya. Nyaya itself means logic. Nyaya karo, meaning you decide between right and wrong, meaning correct truth and falsity in statements. They do so hair-splitting logic that you will lose your mind, really. So much logic is studied there. So now it's being accepted that Indian philosophies are also are present, and they are talking about so many things. There is so much similarity between Greek philosophy and Indian philosophy of BCE era, as I'm saying. And we know that there was certain connection, there was a knowledge transfer also in that point of time between Yunnan and India, like how Ayurveda they have Unani medicine, and Yunnan means Greek. So there was some exchange of information, but clear information is still not, history is not available, who influenced whom. And we know Sanskrit is very old language and our literatures are old. So all that is a different topic. So these three questions are arising out of this question that we have formulated: what ought to be the central question of philosophy? So what should we consider now, especially when definitions of philosophy are changing? So one definition that I am planning to apply today is take philosophy as an activity. These are the latest definition. Wittgenstein, there is a Ludwig Wittgenstein, one philosopher from 21st century. He is arguably the best and unarguably maybe second best philosopher from the 21st century, but nobody can doubt his greatness. He said philosophy is an activity, and he was a linguistic philosopher, analytic linguistic tradition. He said if we explain the words clearly, if we just understand our language properly, all our philosophical problems will go away. And he gave like great descriptions of that. He did not study anything. He was an engineer. He was on war front, and Oxford, they were like folding hands in front of him, come to our university. He was like that, and a very rich person. Like, he gave away all his property to his family. So life also was very interesting, and in seclusion he did all of his work. 2 works he wrote and revolutionized 21st century philosophy. Just 2 basic works he wrote, very simple and logical works, mathematic logical based. Bertrand Russell, if you would have heard, Bertrand Russell was not even his mentor, but Bertrand Russell wrote this book called Principia Mathematica. Principia Mathematica reduces all mathematics to logic. So Wittgenstein used that work and proved Russell wrong and gave a different philosophy. So Russell said, okay, you come to the university, etc. He was there also lecturing for a brief while. Vienna Circle, if you would have also heard, was found around after Wittgenstein brought this kind of analytic tradition was starting there in Europe. So he said, if we explain words clearly, some things can be expressed, some things cannot be expressed. Whatever is expressed should be expressed in a clear-cut manner. We should know what we are talking about. Once that is done, all these confusions about philosophical matters will end. Like confusion about ethics. You think something is right, I think something else is right. You believe that eating certain kind of food is right, I think eating certain kind of food is totally not right. So these are differences in our ethical structures. So once we define what is ethics, we come to certain common grounds, accept each other's definition, then we know whether we agree or disagree, and then we can move forward. We can't claim truth that no, my way is only the right way, my way or the highway. This way it won't work. He said define all these terms, and once you define it, they were trying to bring a kind of certainty in philosophy, a scientific certainty in philosophy, like how economics has a certainty in itself, in its structure. The margin of error is much less, there is more chances of it succeeding, the laws and theories that have been made. So it works. Similarly, he brought a kind of certainty in philosophy with his logical applications. So he said philosophy is an activity, implying that once you engage in doing philosophy. Now, what is engaging in doing philosophy? Our beginning of our lecture, that talk about the tattva of things. Where you want to begin, whether you begin, yesterday this question came, society is first or individual is first, the subjective is first or the objective is first. So these questions you have to settle, then you can move forward. Settle in the sense you have to at least know that you are confused. Even that is a conclusion, no? That place also is important to reach, that I don't know. You can't begin by knowing, then you are not a learner, you are not a student anymore. So he said philosophy is an activity. Engage in doing philosophy. find out the basic structures, like how an engineer, examines the structural aspects of a physical house. He finds out how much weight will come, how many people will live, what kind of things will be put here, whether there's a factory or a house. Depending on that, he will create the weight load. Depending on that, the bridges will be built and how many vehicles will pass, how many can stand still on that, what is in the base, whether there's an ocean there or a soil there, etc. He will examine all that and come up with a structure. Same way in philosophy or in economics also, if you study philosophy of economics, you have to analyze these basics tattvas of what you are studying. Then you have gotten into the philosophy of it. So law, we all know we should stop at the signal. This is a rule. We say what rule? We waste time, etc. But see the philosophy of it, that we all give up our rights to travel as the way we want, and we all get safety because of that. Because if we don't stop, how traffic jams happen. Every India, we are experts in breaking signals. So so we all give up our rights, and once we give up our rights, we actually experience more freedom. We have freedom to travel wherever we want with safety. We know that nobody will break the signal and hit me somewhere. And if all of us start breaking signals, then there is anarchy. Nobody can reach anywhere. So this is not something, if you don't logically analyze it, see the structure of laws, you may say, these are all laws, are all control. We need absolute freedom. What is absolute freedom? Absolute freedom is some kind of anarchy. So once in the society, the meaning of terms change. When you are alone, you have total freedom. But then you don't need freedom that time because there's nobody to judge you. You can do anything in your free time when nobody is watching. If you are on an island, then you kill any animal, you eat anything, cut down trees, it won't matter at all. Nobody will judge you. Nobody will say you are not free, don't do it. But if one human is there, then they will have different opinions. So philosophy is an activity. What kind of activity? That you analyze the tattvas, you see vision, you try to see what are the basics that I'm engaging in and why these basics are important, whether these basics make sense or not. So these basics can be subjective basics also, like the questions of existence that I asked you about, questions of God. Some people have this question of God, about death, etc. They are worried what will happen in past life, what will happen in future life. These questions have to be answered. Like when I entered philosophy, my first interview, so I was talking about religion to my professors. I never realized that there are so many complicated thoughts in the world by philosophers. And because, our family, I don't think any family will ever say, go and study philosophy. Never parents will say. So my parents told me, this is just a joke, that, तुम पूरे ही पागल हो जाओगे philosophy पढ़ के. So then I realized that I am half crazy. So it's just for, humorous purposes. Don't take it seriously. So philosophy, when I entered, I thought it is about religion because our first exposure to these theories through religion. Our parents and people who know us, they give us certain kind of religion, religious ideas. They even, mold us in those ideas, give us some kind of beliefs. They may not necessarily be able to explain us all the time when we question. They say, no, believe, because there's a lot of authority sitting on our heads in case of religions. So it's fine. So I came to philosophy through that. And my professors, they were kind enough to admit me in that course. They understood probably that my intention is correct. So when I entered, then I realized that religion is one aspect of philosophy. Philosophy of religion we study, but then this metaphysics is there, epistemology, there are much more basic questions are there. Who am I? This is a famous spiritual question. There is also a philosophical question, because these questions of existence of mind, which is also important for you guys, so as social philosophers, whether I exist, because I can give my testimony. Excuse me. I can give my testimony that I am, but how do I confirm the existence of others? Right? So existence of mind. I have consciousness, but the other also have consciousness. Then whether their consciousness is like my consciousness, I know what I am. Others I don't know. Even I don't know what I am. I am my name. I could be this form, 5 feet 6 inch, almost. Oh, this is my name. I come from this. All history is there. But what we were in the childhood, if our childhood photo we see and now photo we see, they are not same physically. There is nothing similar. Bodies, all cells have also changed now, scientifically. Full body has been replaced. And body is what? 70% water. So it's like a walking bag of conscious water. So who am I? This is one of the questions. These questions are very important in philosophy. So what ought to be the central question of philosophy? Now you have to tell me. What ought to be the central question of philosophy? First, you define somewhat. This is not a class, we are having a dialogue. I may know one or two things more than you, but doesn't mean we all can't think in that direction. Basic questions we all of us have. So you should tell me now what is philosophy, then we can come. I am taking this approach. Philosophy as an activity. If we are open to conversing with each other, that's why I said yesterday that we are not conducting any lectures. We are just engaging in a dialogue, not a monologue. As I talk, and some dialogue is already going on in your head. I'm seeing like what some questions have popped up already. So this is a dialogue. When somebody is talking, you listen. Try to understand what they're saying, because you can only understand when you are in their shoes. Let them be whoever their beliefs are, but understand their position. And from that position, then you can question. First, refine the question. Once question is understood in clear light, then answer can be found. When you guys will write your researches, you have to first decide your thesis statement. Your guide will tell you, decide your central question first. Title is given, outline is created, then your way to your research is clear cut out. You can move forward then from there. Like in case of library, we said if it's not organized, whole world of information doesn't mean a thing. It's all paper and ink, unless it is organized in a certain manner, right? The whole book is organized. All our books that we read are preface, different chapters, outline, etc. It's organized. So I am putting this question back to you as a dialogue. What ought to be? Ought, now I have told you the implications, because ethics itself is an unsettled question. So ought, we may leave it aside. We'll say what are the central questions of philosophy. Philosophy, as I've said, activity. Now we will engage in that, and what we will do itself is philosophy. Central question we decide or not doesn't matter. 1 hour we can't decide this, such a big subject which is continuing for 4,000 years, 5,000 years. But we will at least move forward. We'll try to move forward. Once we are active in that direction, to think in those terms of basics of things that we are doing, things we are pursuing in personally, spiritually, religiously, economically, socially, what have you, whatever direction that you pursue. What are the basics? Where do we start? What are we searching? What are we seeking? Are we seeking knowledge? Are we seeking vision? Are we seeking some satisfaction? Are we seeking happiness, as Aristotle said? All of our searches are for happiness. It's a very common term. Here we call it, ananda, bliss. Even bliss is not a proper translation. We don't look for happiness. Happiness is, as they say, temporary. Pleasure is temporary. Something, if it gives you happiness, when that is taken away, your happiness will go. In Indian tradition, we say ananda. Satchidananda, if you would have heard, that truth is reality, being. Chit is consciousness, and ananda. Ananda implies no causality, your original state. So what are you seeking? That is the question. That will decide what is the central question of your search, because this is a question. So I will give the floor to Ashish sir first, and all our students are also here. Rahul is here, I hope. So we can, start hearing some answers, then it will be fun. Thank you.
Oh, okay. If I had to ask what is the central question of philosophy, I actually will tell you what I think, but I'm very confused about what the correct answer is between the two questions. Why are we here and why am I here? I think are the central questions of philosophy. But my problem is when I try to answer why I am here, that leads me down a different path than the answer to the question, why are we here? Analysis at the individual level leads me to very different answers. compared to answers at the societal level, at the civilizational level. And if I ask why am I here, it leads me down the path of introspection. If I ask why are we here, then even if I say that I am not able to answer the question, then I think it is my moral duty to try and make sure that we contribute to a society that is able to answer that question.
Yes.
That, to me, they are very different. And so I'm confused about what the correct central question is.
Yes. Same problem of individualism and holism. Where do we begin? Because society has made us who we are, and we are also making society what it is. Where do we begin?
Correct.
So that is something we all have to contemplate on. So that's why Indian darshanas, that way they are much more complete, because they accept this aspect. They are not only empirical, just logical. Socrates was somehow more inclined towards this Indian type of philosophy. He said unexamined life is not worth living. So he's talking about life. He's not talking about knowledge that only seek logical structures, dry structures. We can be very logical dry, but it may not necessarily give us the right way. Like how we know how to make a bomb, right? We have that technology. We can make the best of bombs. But how to use it? Where to use it? Who should have the control? These questions are different questions. So who will decide all that?
So just to add on to that, so for example, if I were to think of my own self, and when I say my own self, leave aside for the moment the question about being and a physical existence, but a cancer within my body is trying to do what is best for itself. Unfortunately, when it tries to do what is best for itself, it's really harmful to my body. And similarly, if I analyze myself in context to society, if I try to do what is best for myself, then that may not be what is best for society. So what is the appropriate level of analysis, to me, is a very confusing question.
Yes. Very, very serious question you have raised, that we may think that something is good for us from our perspective. But somebody, I think, told me sometime, that if all of our wishes came true, we wish different things, all over the world. This world won't be able to exist, because one single person will keep everything. Probably people want the whole world. They want the sky is the limit at this. Ambition is now a eulogized characteristic. If you are not ambitious, then something is wrong with you. I think there is something wrong with this notion itself. That only ambition you have to keep working, get the way, whatever way you need to. Samadama danda bhed. That's what we may interpret it differently. Of course, you can disagree with me, no problem with that. But if you are just, your direction is this, that I should get, so that may not be true. Then you can break signals. You can do anything to anyone, remove that person if you disagree, remove things, people's opinion, just my way or the highway, as they say. So it's a very serious question, really.
And it's sorry, just to continue, and I know there are other questions over here, but say, for example, and this may be a very controversial thing to say, but where else to ask this question if not in a philosophy class? Was Jnaneshwar seeking what was best for himself when he decided to go in for Samadhi? Might the world have benefited had he decided to stay around and try and answer more difficult questions that would have come about in his own brilliant mind? So what he did, was it best for himself or was it best for society? And again, how to think and how to resolve this question, I've always wondered. So if you have any pointers, I would be very... I'm not saying you should have the answer, but if you could tell me where to and how to start thinking about it.
Yes. No, I also don't have any illusions of having the answers for everything. I think that makes it easier to really go in the correct directions of answering a question.
Right.
I have not read Jnaneshwari. I've just read little bit, the poetic part. It's like really beautiful, I must say that. And so I will complicate the matter here further for you. Okay. So because we don't have an answer, so let's analyze it. You asked whether he did what is right for him or the society. Right. How can we decide?
Right.
Jnaneshwari was written on Bhagavad Gita, let's say, if we take that reference, whatever his philosophy was. So one of the basic philosophies, Advaita, non-duality in India. Adi Shankaracharya, who's there, he's the pioneer. Then there are many pioneers of Advaita philosophy. I don't know, students know them. Ramanujacharya, Vallabhacharya is there. These are Vaishnava saint, bhakti traditions they do. Even devotion they bring in Advaita philosophy. People think Advaita is very logical, monistic philosophy, but there are bhakti traditions also in Advaita philosophy. Dualistic tradition also is there, Madhvacharya, if you would have heard. Dvaita, his philosophy is Dvaita coming from Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita. Anyway, Jnaneshwari was written Bhagavad Gita on Advaita. Now, when you ask this question that whether he did it for himself or for the society, where do we put the onus on? I am problematizing this question by saying that how do we differentiate when there is a realized person or a person who has certain kind of spiritual experience? Let's use that term, Adhyatmik Jnana. Okay, Adhyatmik is a better term. This spirituality also has great connotations with Christianity, because they talk of this Holy Spirit, Father, etc. But here we say Adhyatma. So because of his Adhyatmic vision, in Advaita, this separation of the world and myself. Who am I said. A self. When I am not there, when I am sleeping, for example, is the world existing? So what is the difference in this world and myself? Whether decisions that we take, they can't be independent also, and they can't be dependent also. How do we separate human beings? See, we say nature, and things we create are not nature. This is a common problem in defining nature. People get confused also because they are never clear about what is nature. This concrete structures, beautiful or ugly, however they may be, that we create all over the town, remove hills and put structures there. Are these natural or not? If we are not natural, then they are not natural. There can be nothing which cannot be not natural. Everything is part of nature. So these decisions that we take also, we may separate the society. We may separate the system that, this is system's fault that somebody is being discriminated. This is system's fault that this politician is doing whatever they are doing. This is system's fault that my town is not clean. This is system's fault that somebody is spitting. This is system's fault that there are criminal activities, police are not working. But who are those people? They are people like you and me. Politician is somebody who has reached because of us. So where is that separation? So Jnaneshwar, whenever he took whatever decisions he took, it cannot be separated because we have defined it in this manner, individual and the society. So we have this individualism is now such a prized thing in the whole world. West has given us this idea of individualism, nuclear family. My opinion, my identity. But then how in India we have a different kind of approach. How can we separate ourselves from the society? Whether it is possible or not. Even if you become a monk, a sannyasi, and become an ascetic and go to the villages or caves, you can never live without some kind of intervention, human intervention. As we say, we are social animals. Sociology defines human beings as social animals. So I find it always difficult to analyze these decisions that we take without considering the context of the society. We can never say that this person was totally selfish, because no decisions can be, wrong decisions. You always decide what you want to decide. You may say somebody forced me, but you also had a choice of not doing that, no? So even if you are caught in the jail, so one more, melancholic example I will give. Albert Camus, if you had heard of him, existentialist philosopher, very good literary, also won Nobel Prize for his book called Myth of Sisyphus. Post Second World War, France, when it came out of German occupation, now there was a different kind of mood there, because all of their vision of romanticism, everything was shattered. So the philosophy that came out of that was existentialism. He said the central question of life is, the main philosophical question of life is whether to commit suicide or not. You decide. If you are living, then why? If not, you always have an option, no? Go, that's it. Why do you want to tell everyone I am going like this? Means you are searching something still. So what is that? Those questions are the real, like we said, black and white. All the fun is in that, in between that, in the grays. Black and white, this dual, only more, what do you call this? Two valued logic. Life is not two valued logic. Ji.
Okay, let's go through some of the questions that have been raised so far. So Shashank asks if Tattva is about yathartha, that is about the itness of the thing. If so, can we proceed to philosophize about what must be or should be in a normative sense?
Okay. Is tattva about yathartha, itness of the thing? Okay. Yathartha is yathartha, however it is, that
It
way.
is.
That is tattva. Itness. This itness is used in Buddhism a lot, thatness, itness, trying to reach a reality which is, unadulterated itness, the being of it, unadulterated being. Okay. So, tattva about yathartha.
So Shashank is basically saying, I mean, at least how I understand it. Shashank, feel free to correct me if my understanding of the question is wrong. But what he's saying is, if everything just is, then is there any point in even asking about what is best or what can be changed? Whatever is, and that's all there is to it.
Yes. So, if so, can we proceed to philosopher what must be, should in a normative sense? Yeah. So, we can, if we say things are, as we know that reality is in a way and somewhat independent of us also and dependent of us also. Now, first, the question is, what is this yathartha? This yathartha also we have to find out, what is that reality? Because our reality is only limited to the senses, this body that we have. There is a reality beyond it also, probably not. If it is there, we don't know. Some people, they die and even come back. We have examples like that. They even remember some past life. They confirmed. Some cases are confirmed in that they can remember certain details. On how they access those details, we don't know. So what is that itness itself is a question first. Let's go for proceeding in the argument. Let's say, yeah, this tattva jnana is yathartha. Yes, that's what Indian philosophy, they are saying, that tattva means they find out this yathartha, have a vision of it. Vision also implies the directness, immediate. What is that word they use? I'm not getting that word, but it implies that immediate perception. There is no mediation in it, because mediation adds that layer of separation between me and the reality. So you should have that direct access to that reality. Have meaning, it is already there. That's what they say, but we are in ignorance, some kind of ignorance of it. It's not that it will come. It cannot come because it is real. It's true. This is all Indian perspective, I'm telling. So if so, can we proceed to philosophize about what must? So one answer is we cannot, because there is nothing which must be, which ought to be. But then that ought to be can be defined depending on our freedom, because we are in a context of society. We are in a context of being in different areas, different environments, different political situations. People are also independent of us. They are also, visualizing the itness is in a different way. So depending on that, then we can decide what ought to be. We can't totally give it up also, because then other will decide what ought to be. We can't have that. Total control can't be given up. So we all have to decide. So one way is that we say we are the creators of our life. We are the creators of this art. Nothing is right and wrong. There's one famous statement, no? It's human mind that makes it so. So, okay, if that is our way of looking at it, fine. But anyway, we have to have something. Total freedom, then, even sannyasi can't be totally free. They have to be in certain kind of structures. Society only calls them sannyasi. They have given up everything. Okay, I hope that answers the question.
Okay, Shashank, did you have a follow-up question, or should I go on to the next one?
No, you can go on to the next one.
Got it. Okay. Anchi asks, is there any point to even asking the question about whether philosophy should have a central question? So she says that she's always seen philosophy as a guide for other subjects. And she says, according to her, therefore, this explains why philosophers studied other streams historically as well. So Adam Smith, for example, studied, whether it is psychology in the theory of moral sentiments or economics in the wealth of nations. He really was studying, and I think Almozo sir, you spoke about this also. Philosophy is about doing stuff rather than trying to answer the
Yes.
big picture questions.
Yes.
So she says that she believes that we should seek how we can best understand natural sciences, societal studies, and find the point in studying these fields, and perhaps therefore, as a consequence, learning about philosophy. So I interpret her question as essentially agreeing with you that philosophy is about doing rather than about thinking.
Yes.
Would
Yes.
that be a correct understanding of her
Okay.
question, and what would you say in response?
This longer question is the one you're reading, Anshi Pandey, no?
Yes, yes.
Can philosophy have a central question? So we have problematized that point. Now we don't know what is the central question. Depending on our inclinations, our dispositions, we can decide. Like I studied ontology, so that was my thing, you know, my cup of tea. So that's fine. I always saw philosophy as a guide for other subjects. Yes, that's true, because historically everything was being studied in philosophy as we found clear-cut logical orders, clear-cut methodology of experimentation and observation. Those subjects got divorced from philosophy because they were not gray anymore. Like first came our physical sciences. Now recent child of philosophy is what? Our psychology, sociology. Still there is a great overlap between these subjects. So once we find a proper methodology of studying that subject which is yielding specific results, the probability of getting good results are always fine. That subject, you know, leaves the fold of philosophy in a way and becomes a department in itself. So it is a guide for other subjects. That's true. That's why it's also called mother definition, mother of all sciences. Explains why philosophers studied other streams as well as historically. Yes, I believe we should seek how can we best understand the natural sciences and societal studies and find the point in studying this field through philosophy. Of course, yes, because these subjects don't question themselves so much. Like how I said, history, science has an axiom, and even in scientists, if you see, I may be wrong, of course, there may be different scientists, but in general, that we see, scientists are convinced that the reality is empirical. That's their beginning point, no? Otherwise, how can you work with that object? You have to consider it real. But philosophers even go before that. They say whether the world is real or not, I don't know. So how will you experiment with something unreal? They say I am not real. So if you are not real, object is not real, how will you move forward? Scientists laugh at this question. But they have a basic structure. But we also have to go before it, because science, there is a crisis in science also. Science also keeps tries to update itself all the time. What kind of implications are there now? Because there are governmental scientists also. You know, you can pay money and get research done in science in particular fields. So researches in nuclear fields, etc., it can be used for societal purposes, and it can be also used to destroy the society also. So these are philosophical questions. How to use the information of making a bomb is a very serious question, social question, philosophical question also. So social, because what kind of impact it will have on the society, that you can study in sociology, social science. But even before that, then what is society and what is the right kind of society? That is a philosophical question. So you have to go before that. You can't say that once society is done, then I will philosophically analyze. You will be late. Philosophy comes first. You have to, what we said is the basic building blocks of everything, the basic structures studied by philosophy. So until you study the basic structures, your structure won't stand tall. That's just my view. I'm a philosopher, so I will say all this. You know, you can tell me what you think also. And is there a last point? I think societal studies and find the point in studying these fields through philosophy. I think it's complete.
Ramita asks, and I'm fascinated with this question, does getting a good insight about philosophy help us in identifying the subliminal emotional manipulation that is innate in our life?
Yes, yes. And I would say definitely, definitely. As I said, psychology is the latest child of philosophy. So as this existentialism field that I said, they were pioneers in psychoanalysis. I did my research in Jean-Paul Sartre's Nothingness. So I gave a spirituality of nothingness, you know, adhyatmic visualization, as they say. No, I did that of nothingness. So I studied a lot of psychology without knowing this is psychology, because it's part of psychoanalysis. So definitely it gives you a lot of because it provides you tools to look at yourself. So psychology is what of the structures of your psyche, and our what do you call this? The psychoanalysis, psychological tradition. Psychology is not a hard science. Okay, keep this in mind. Pure scientists don't accept psychology. Psychiatry is a different thing. For only a psychiatrist can give you medicine. Psychologists are only social scientists. So they don't get this right to give prescriptions initially. You have to reach certain stage probably. So once you have these tools of analyzing yourself, you can see yourself much better and analyze your theories and worldviews, because we are also we are conditioned in certain manner by our environment, our culture. So our responses to our environment, we can observe those responses and then apply them in these theories that we are seeing in philosophy, that a person with certain metaphysics who believe that God is in this world or God is outside this world, that person will have a certain disposition of seeing the world. Then how they get knowledge. So I get my knowledge, one will say I get my knowledge from Newton's books, other will say I get my knowledge from certain other religious book. So their epistemology is also different, and similarly they will act in the world. Their emotions also will be affected by that, because probably their parents also were similar. Some become opposite also. What their parents did, they try to become totally different from that. So all these things can help you. If you even become rational and logical properly, you can see all this really. The psychology is studying the structures of the mind is specifically. And another one problem I observe with the psychology is this influence of Freudian and Jungian influence. They have a certain frame of reference, but because there is nobody who has done such a pioneering work, so it continues. It's okay. In Indian tradition, I think we can find, but the work is so less here, and we are not so savvy online. The way online, if we go, there's so much literature on English. One book, if you want to find, you will find 100. Hindi and Sanskrit book, I think, and Marathi books, our students will find it difficult to search online.
On a related note to Jungian and Freudian outlooks toward life, I think Adya left the call, but she had asked earlier about whether you were acquainted with the work of John Beebe, Beebe.
Are you acquainted? No, I have not heard his name, John Beebe.
Okay, I don't think she's on the call. Adya, are you on the call? No, I don't think she is. Rahul asks, what is the definition of a good insight?
Okay, what is the definition of a good insight? Okay, let me think about it. But so, are there any other question? Maybe I'll answer this a little later. And I was expecting some answers also from students. Are there any students who want to define or talk about philosophy? What is their understanding of philosophy?
I think Anchi has sort of answered that question, so I'll read out her comment. And this is partly in response to what you said and partly in response to Shashank's question about Yatharth. She says, even if a truth exists and even if its itness is decided, philosophy still makes sense because to her it is a means to an end. Philosophy is not the end in and of itself. It tells us how to approach the truth.
Yes.
Would that make sense? Number one, and my follow-on question to what Anchi and Shashank have both said, would this be another way of restating the whole free will and deterministic debate? If we go down the Yatharth path, is that something like determinism? And is Anchi saying that no, there is still space for free will? Would that be a correct characterization?
Yeah, I think this answer, I think even if a truth exists and its itness is decided, philosophy still makes sense because it will entail how humans should approach the truth. The study ethics studied under philosophy. Okay, it's a way or means to approach truth, not the end point of it. Yeah. So philosophy has no end point really. It's more like an understanding of our surroundings. As we say, love of wisdom, love of learning. Darshana, vision. So what is reality? Depending on that, your vision will keep changing, because reality, now you have to decide whether reality is something fixed As some people want to say reality is one. Abrahamic religions, if we see, for them the ultimate absolute reality is just one, and only in that specific way. In Indian context, we say reality is oneness, non-duality, advaita. Not two. Everything is expression of God. So mountains are expression of God, rivers are expressions of God. So what is that ultimate, as she's saying, end point? That end point is not necessarily given by philosophy. Philosophy is only, we are saying, it's a way of, it's a vision to first see what is it, behold it. And once you behold it, then how you want to contextualize it, it depends on you. And spiritual element is a little more in Indian philosophy. They say you begin from yourself, you know. As we, many classes, if you see of our acharyas, they begin by saying, you know, Atma Vare Drishtavyaha. This is the first thing they start with, that know the self first. And I also, my dispensation also is a little more towards the individual, not in that individual Western individual person, you know, that I have all the right, not like that. But the individual is the basis of perceiving the world. Because when I sleep, the world is not. When I awake, then the world is. When I go, for the world I am gone, but for me the whole world is gone. Isn't it? I may go away when somebody dies, the whole, people say he's gone, world is still here, but for me also world is gone, the whole world at one go. So these social problems, I feel, because we have been struggling in India also on these social problems for so long, so many are there, you know. Cleanliness is a social problem. See, from cars we see people throwing things out and no dustbins around. How to, system has not been able to do it. We have like a great constitutions, as we know, there's so many things, but implementation is not there. So this implementation not being there implies that there is some problem with the individuals themselves. And if every individual changes himself or herself, then there is no need for social change, because the whole world, society is changed. Then we can all decide what is the right system. So this question, though we can say there is no end point, all these end points are part of this contemplations of philosophy. Like in ethics, I won't tell you what is right and wrong. I will tell you what people think are right and wrong depending on their context. You decide, students decide what is right and wrong. We are not here to tell you what is right and wrong and what is the end goal. A utilitarian will say, you know, most utility, end goal. Okay.
Shashank had a question to ask. Yes, Shashank.
I would like to add to this. I mean, the point of free will that you raised. If you read J. Krishnamurti's work, Jiddu Krishnamurti, a lot of it is Buddhist philosophy. So his idea that the future is the projection of whatever you gained in the past. So you can't approach it until you clear yourself of your past and you have a blank slate. And only then you can perceive what reality is. And no one can describe that reality to you in a sense. So if you think of it in that context, then yes, free will. All of our free will is basically a material total of whatever experiences we had in past.
Right. Yeah, free will is a very interesting question also. It's a longer discussion, and how can we put it, like, if you want to summarize this, just a deterministic aspect. And I always found this point interesting, that, you know, even though we may have free will, like I can just decide to get removed from this, you know, go out from this class, so that's my free will, of course. But then see the causality of it, and see, causes means different thing in Indian tradition. This is a very interesting, Ashish sir, if you see Aristotle, if you would have read an Indian tradition, Aristotle talks of many different causes, forgetting the different categorization, ancillary cause and you know, supporting cause. Same way Indian tradition also they talk. So I was surprised when I read that how they can talk about same things in the same periods. In Indian tradition, like how we make a pot, so the pot maker is one cause, the wheel is one cause, supporting cause, the working cause, soil is one cause, water is one cause. So all these causes should be the time and day and the temperature are different causes. So point being, this causes if we take, so I deciding to go from this class, I have chosen it, this is my free will. But how does it arise? Because my thinking is not independent of the context that I come from, or the type of mentality that I have, or the kind of people that I've interacted with, the kind of behavior or uh, the character that has been ingrained in me, or the activities that have happened in this class, or the students, some student told me something or some disagreement, I may decide to leave. So can I say that my decision was independent of these causes? So in that sense, it becomes somewhat deterministic. We can go still step further, behind rather, not further, behind. That these effects that have happened, let's say there was a disagreement between all of us, some commotion, some ruckus happened. You guys are causes and effect of your parents. Like I am an effect of my parents and family and the society. So what my parents ate and the environment they lived in, they created me at certain point of time. Their marriage was an effect of the causes of their family coming together and their father. And even if we go to the causes behind the chemical reactions that happen because for making a kid, they are what nutrients from whatever they eat. So those eggs and sperms that connected and created us, they were spread out in the fields at some point of time. Your father and mother picked it up, ate it, and then it became you. So this is all determinism, a kind of determinism. You are already decided in a way. So this problematizes this point of decision making. So then how do we define this free will? So I recall very interesting statement by Ramakrishna, Vivekananda's guru. He used to say that we are like, cows tied to one pole. So we have free will in this circle, where how long the rope is. And in that you are free. Like how we can't fly. So in that sense you are free. But then you can't say that you are independent also, totally free. So we have to find out what is that free will also first.
I have this, I don't know, very primal urge to disagree with that. It makes me irritated, angry. I don't know what is the correct word to think that I'm not free. It's such a disturbing thought, at least for me. I don't know if everybody else on the call feels that way or not. But पता नहीं, मुझे अजीब सा लगता है, the thought that I am restricted even within that circle, that metaphor that you use. It just feels wrong.
Yeah. I don't know now.
No, don't get me wrong. I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying.
जी, I understand.
मतलब अगर वो सच है तो then it makes me feel so restricted in terms of what I can do in my life.
जी.
What Freud tried to do was try to give this theorization a predictive power by saying you give me two different people and I'll place them in two different circumstances and make doctor out of one and perhaps whatever robber out of one.
Ji. No, I understand what Ashish sir is also saying, and Shashank sir is a student or a faculty? I'm not sure.
Shashank sir is a student.
Is a student, okay, very good. So there's a philosophy that I did my research in, existentialism. So Jean-Paul Sartre, he made a very interesting statement. One book is called Nausea, which won Nobel. You should check that out. It will give you some nausea, but it will give you a lot of things to ponder upon. He made a statement, said, man is condemned to be free. Man is condemned to be free. Now, how you want to decide that? Like we said, the central question is whether to commit suicide or not. So these frame of references also, because this word freedom, being free, what do you mean by that? If you're in an island all alone, will you talk about freedom, you say? What will freedom mean there? It won't mean anything. In the context of the society, we define our terminologies. And in that context, we talk about freedom. So what are we talking about? Many people misinterpret freedom to be unlimited freedom, to do anything they want. That is not freedom, that is anarchy. freedom can make sense only in that roped context. Because how will you define if you're totally free, then we may not be here, because somebody is free to create nuclear bombs also. Because we have restricted that freedom, they are somewhere. And there are people also who are trying to get their hands on that and reach somewhere. So that kind of people are also there. So should we leave them totally free? So what is freedom? What does freedom mean for you? So begin with you. Like I said, my disposition is more towards spiritual, subjective, because we have to begin there. We are the readers. We are the people who pick up books. We are the deciding. We decide. Environment affects us, but still we can decide whether to commit suicide or not. That's the ultimate. If you are living, then why?
So I have a strict question because you mentioned Sartre, and it's not a question pertaining to the discussion, but I picked up reading Nietzsche and tried reading Beyond Good and Evil, but I couldn't go beyond the first page. How do you read Nietzsche? Like, how do you go about trying to make sense of what he's trying to say?
Oh, why? Nietzsche is not so complicated, I would say. Nietzsche is
not in terms of the ideas, but when I read the English translation of original German works. So those translations are crazy to make sense of. I mean, how do I go about cracking it?
Yeah. So I would say I will recommend a book called The Irrational Man. There's a book called The Irrational Man. I'm forgetting the author of it, but it's a very famous book. And it talks about this because existentialists, they say the existence is irrational, absurd. Like how we talked about whether we are rational or not yesterday. This was the question that was raised. So existentialists say we are irrational in reality because our existence itself is irrational. We can give reasons and causes, like Anshi was saying, everything, it's a way to truth, etc. But we can't put reason to our existence unless we give a religious theory, and particularly Western type of religious theory. They decide this point of creation. For us, though, it's like, what time is cyclic. It's just going on in certain cycles. Vedas or Rishis never even wrote their names. They didn't care who was writing. The books have just come like that, aparusheya, without any human intervention, as if. So, Irrational Man, read that book. That will summarize all these philosophers for you, the whole philosophy. Then you can approach Nietzsche, because Nietzsche was a great scholar. He was a world's best philologist at his point of time. He had so much information of language and the amount of work he did. And if you don't know, he died. He lost his mental balance towards the end of his life. But a great thinker, and Hitler also tried to appropriate him. But now we are seeing that his point was totally opposite. He collapsed seeing a horse being beaten. He was so sensitive towards animal. So somebody like Hitler also appropriated him because he talked of a Superman, but his Superman is a different Superman. And I've also not read so much of Nietzsche, but I know the basic idea because of this existentialism that I did. So begin there, Irrational Man.
Done. I just had one last. I know we're almost out of time, but I just had one last question. You mentioned earlier on in your talk that Wittgenstein was arguably the best, and then you said definitely at least the second best philosopher from the 21st century. I'm very curious to hear who you think is the best from the 21st century.
Who could that be? See, I am not remembering the name because philosophers, disagree and debate everything. So I always have to keep that option open.
Okay.
So because his name is, his work is great, that is in common agreement. But some people say, who are the other philosophers? I'm just trying to recall. Like these, our continental philosophers are there. Jean-Paul Sartre I studied. I would say his Being and Nothingness. Heidegger is there. Heidegger wrote great. Edmund Husserl is there. He was a phenomenology who started. See, now phenomenology is catching steam again. His project was to make philosophy as certain as science. So he totally removed that, and the study of consciousness that has increased after that from phenomenology. Even Jean Paul Sartre got affected by Husserl. He studied Heidegger and Husserl. So these philosophers I can think of who may come higher too, but because this empirical Western tradition is also there, which is part of Wittgenstein structures, Bertrand Russell and all, they were more atheistic kind of philosophers. May not be, they would not have declared that. Even Jean Paul Sartre was atheistic, the philosopher I studied, but then I made a spiritual, that was fun of it. Totally interpret him spiritually. So that was possible in continental, and they separated these continental philosophers,
right.
Saying these are continental, Orientalism, continentalism. There are so many ways we divide ourselves. Yes.
So one last question.
Yes, please.
What is the etymology of your name? Because I'm trying to make sense of what Almoso free means. Where does that come from?
Okay. So I can give you an answer for that. It's it's somewhat controversial in the sense how we are thinking these days, but it's okay. I will tell anyway. So it's a short form of my old name. My old name was Ali Muhammad Sodawala. So AL from Ali, MO from Muhammad, and Sodawala, SOW from Sodawala, Almozo. So when I was changing it, when I had a fallout of that religious ideology, when I joined my MA in philosophy, by the time my course was getting over, I was like, my research is, should not say that this research is written by Ali Muhammad. I said that will be a blasphemy with philosophy. So I thought I will change it. So I wanted to get rid of my surname also. So I told the lawyer when changing it officially that let the space be free. So he wrote free there. I said it's fine, word and meanings are the same. So Almozo free, it's an abbreviation of my old name, Almozo, and then free is my surname now.
What a lovely story.
It's a lovely story.
And thank you for asking the question, Shashank.
Ji.
Wonderful. Is your thesis available online? Maybe get a chance to read it?
Yeah, I'm trying to upload it to Shodh Ganga.
Okay.
And still I'm not finding time. I think they need a particular format.
Okay.
So I'm being a little lazy, but I can send it to you also personally. I think I'm I'm a little afraid. I don't know how accurate I was in that, because as we keep going, we keep evolving also, but I can share it with you, of course.
I mean, only of course if you're comfortable sharing it, but
yes, definitely. Yes, I'm planning to put it online, so it doesn't matter. It's okay. Ji.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you so much for making the time.
Ji.
And to the students, thank you for choosing to turn up on a Saturday afternoon. I love this session. I wish we could have continued for longer. I need to join another call, unfortunately, right now.
Ji.
Almozo ji, thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you for having me here. Thank you.